Okay, we're live. We are live. I can't cut it out. This is on YouTube now. You don't? Gosh darn it.
I'm like, he's like, oh, it's supposed to work. I'm like, well, obviously it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back.
What I meant, the way that you say it is so cool. Like, do not argue with me.
Hey, we're back. Can you hear us?
Live bloopers.
Okay, now I think now it works. I don't know. It works quite.
Hmm?
Okay, there you go. It works.
Yeah, it works now. It works now. Yeah. All right.
Alright, we're live.
Well, that was a. I don't know why you have a restart. I think you just like pre-restart OBS every time you start recording. Just press hit start and then restart it again. Just to make sure. I don't know, man. Like I think there's some like ordering that you. Okay, what we're doing. We're live. Welcome to episode 19 of Audio Discord AD Podcast. I think I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna say the name. I'm just gonna call it AD Podcast because I'm getting lazy. Today we're talking about graphs and its limitations. I think we have some very well educated, first, whatever you want to call it, people here to talk about it. Me, excluding me, because I don't like I don't look at graphs. But Ken and Anthony, they both have their own rigs, and Korn is just a Harman boy. So
It's the best curve ever.
there you go. Thank you, Harman boy. So I think I think to start, I feel like without getting like less of a technical question before, like, because you guys all use the same rig, right? You and Korn and Ken, right? You guys use the whatever, the 711 mic, whatever. Anthony, explain the setup to me, please. I don't.
Yeah, so first it's I have this awesome PowerPoint here that I made.
Oh my god.
So there's a whole bunch of different types of rigs out there. A lot of the ones the professional CLC use is like this head and torso, what it's abbreviated as HAT, head and torso simulator, and then the new one that Critical and is buying and like Resolve from headphones.com has is this ear and cheek simulator, which is basically like an artificial ear on top of the 711 coupler, IEC 711 coupler. And so what Crin used to use, and I think what Ken and I and a few others have, is a kind of a Chinese knockoff of the Graz RA0045, which is an older version of the ear simulator. And they've come out with a couple new versions. We can talk about that a little bit later, but they came out with a couple of new versions in the last couple of years that the microphone has been modified to give more dampening and higher resolution, up to, I think, 50 kilohertz, which is kind of what some of the newer systems like Head-Fi are using now. So we're using a knockoff of an older standard.
So like, does Crin and Resolve have the same setup now? Is that what I'm getting at? Is that what you're getting at, or is that what I'm hearing?
I believe so. Corin can probably provide more detail.
I think it's similar. I mean, at least they have the same pin as well as the same microphone.
But that's for headphones, right?
Yeah, the
IEM,
headphone one.
You can use it for
Still-
IEMs too.
What I don't think Queen is gonna use it because he already has a database with his current mic. If he measures the new one, then well, we measure 500 earphones. No,
Yeah, you have to put an asterisk, I guess, next to it. I believe what he was trying to do was just buy the cheek and ear only, and then using the existing mic he had. But I think this is just what I remember hearing. I think he said that the measurements didn't turn out very well So
Yeah.
I think he ended up going to buy the coupler or the microphone coupler that typically comes as a set.
Yes. Yeah, and as far as I know, he's not intending to use a new rig for earphones. It's strictly for headphones. It's a new fresh for headphones, but earphones you'll use the existing one because if he measures the new one, all his database are useless. So
But I mean, he's done it before. I mean, he has refreshed his database before with a new setup. I guess like now it's a little bit harder to. I don't know.
But the improvements were great with the old one to the current one. But the improvements are very minute in the grand scheme of things from the current one to the new one.
Oh yeah, you know what? Can't wait for him to measure 500 IEMs again. But aside from that, I think you guys have the older thing. So is it like less compatible now with the graphs that resolved and critical uses with the more professional setup?
So I actually have switched measurement rigs recently too. I went from it's the same type of system, supposedly compatible with the IEC 711 or 60318-4 standard. The previous one I had was kind of a stick-looking device, which is I think you've seen Chronicle's pictures, and a few others. A lot of people have the stick version because it's easier to carry around and more portable. I went with more of a base version now, which is similar. If you're looking on a YouTube video, it's similar to this picture on the bottom left without the ear and black plate portion. So it's a round base that's pretty heavy and sturdy that sits on a table and then has the same microphone on top and coupling system. That one actually gave me slightly different resonance response. So my new graphs aren't totally compatible with my old ones because the old ones I used to have, I tried to match Clinical standard where you have a resonance peak at 8 kilohertz, and now trying to achieve that same resonance on the new coupler I have is pretty challenging to do. To get it, I actually have a lot of the IEMs would be basically very unstable because they're sitting very very far up from the top of the mouth of the ear canal. So putting in the same insertion depth as I used to, now the resonance peak is around 9.5K.
Whoa, that's
Yeah.
a lot of difference.
Yeah, it's a lot different. But you could still up to, I think comparing all the measurement rigs that follow this IEC standard up to, I don't know, maybe 5K is pretty compatible, roughly. And then, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just kind of a guess off the top of my head. And anything after that.
It really depends on how the IEM behaves, right? So like for me, if I shift, I mean some IEMs the nozzle is such that I can shift here and there. I can do a 7K, and I can shift all the way to a 9K. Yeah, the treble response can change quite a bit.
So like I just kind of assume that it's really not like your own graphs are really only compatible, like comparable to your own measurements, right? Is that and I think it's kind of I think up to a point, like how Ant says that it's like even your new rig doesn't it's really hard to compare your new rig versus the old, so it's kind of hard to even comparing, your rig versus somebody else's. I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not totally compatible. Like, for example, let's say, like, Clinical all along measures with like the Apple dongle, so it's an impedance of about 0.9 to 1 ohms. So let's say if you have to switch to a transducer with like maybe above 1 ohm, the measurements could actually change due to the output impedance of the earphone being changed by the output impedance from the source.
Yes.
So it's not totally compatible from user to user, but it's also a lot about the repeatability as well as the consistency. So it makes more sense to only compare with the same user's rig with two earphones instead of um, one guy's rig to another guy's rig. And based off the Taobao, like the 711s that Korean and as well as Linear also has, they can vary quite a lot in the treble. So I think it makes more sense if you compare earphones within that person's own rig rather than against another person's.
Yeah. So, this middle chart here that I have shows two red squiggle or dash lines. That's the tolerance that's built into the IEC standard. So even if you are using the same unit built by the same company, it still can fall anywhere within this tolerance band, which is pretty fine, in the lower frequencies. But as you move up the up to treble region, you're going the tolerance starts to gain quite a bit. So even following the standard correctly, you're still gonna have variation between units as you move up into treble. And then on top of that, like I mentioned before, the RA0045 and those older microphones typically have a resonance peak at 13.5 kilohertz, and so that is a pretty big resonance peak, which you can modify based on the insertion depth of the IEM into the coupler. So on this lower graph, you can see like varying peaks, which a lot of people misinterpret as like looking at Critical's graph or my graph, like, oh, there's a huge like bump in treble at 8K. That's not totally true. It's an artificial resonance that's built into the actual coupling system and also forced by the user who's taking the measurement. So it's hard to I guess say that there's actual peak there because it's due to the system.
But like there are some measurement that doesn't have a peak, namely Hefai's Jude's graph, and he used a very different system, right? And his graph always looks like artificially flat. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, or like, do you know what system that Jude uses from Hefai? Because he's got like a really expensive whatever thing, right?
Yeah, Corn, you want to take that one?
I think Jude uses the 403 or 04.
Yeah, that's why.
The one with the extra like stronger dampening. If I'm not wrong. Yeah.
And does it like do something to like remove the peak or something, or is it?
Yeah. The goal of the more high res in your simulator is to add damping, to simulate what we basically hear. But in terms of criticism, it's also gotten some flack from some people. Many acoustic engineers comment that the peak, as in the dampening, might be over damping the system, and it still doesn't address the accuracy of the 10 to 20 hertz measurements. So in terms of the how accurate it is at 10 20K, it still doesn't address it because the coupler inherently has a so to speak the wrong like the air volume in it.
Okay. And like, and if you and like you mentioned, that it's kind of hard to get consistency and in the higher frequencies. How like how consistent are let's ignore whatever Jude uses. How consistent are like the rigs that Critical uses or anybody else uses? Like, because like I've heard it's kind of, some people say it's really not accurate past 8K. Some people say it's not really accurate past 10K. So like what's the consensus there?
Well, 7.1 is technically accurate up to 10 kilohertz, but basically you will only be taking like useful information, the accurate useful information from about 20 to only perhaps 7 or 8,000 hertz. Above
Yeah,
that, the factors are really also affected by how deep you push the earphones into, where the residual air volume really affects the measurement past 8,000 hertz.
So like it's mostly just like a hardware limitation, or is it just or like it I don't know, like is it just like the technology isn't there, or
Yeah,
or
it is a hardware limitation where uh, they have to design um, a simulator that's more accurate to the human ear, and the I think the 5128, the recent one, um, doesn't quite address the standard. So they might have to recertify like a different kind of standard for it. I don't know.
okay. Um,
Is that the B and K that you're talking about?
Yeah, the BNK, the 5128, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
but for the most part, the majority of the people with a measuring rig, like again, like the non-professionals, let's call it, the people who are doing this for a hobby, uses a measuring rig that's either Critical's rig or his old rig, or and their graphs are, I guess, somewhat compatible. Is that what I'm hearing? And um, how about this? Like, let's not talk about the hardware limitation. Let's talk about the human errors. Because a lot of people have these similar rigs, but their graph turns out like very different. I think and a lot of people like to argue like, well, people have similar rigs and they should look similar. um, yeah. Ken, do you could you like could you like say like why does it measure, like different people measure with the same setup can measure differently? Like even with like using the Apple dongle, with why does their graph look sometimes like does not have a sub base roll off when it really shouldn't have?
Yeah, because I think from what I see, when like some IEMs that obviously they're not supposed to measure like that, like, so a lot of people do not know how to calibrate their system. The Apple dongle has, at least on the iOS, the Lightning one, which is what I use. It has a natural sub base roll off, so you need to calibrate that, and then you need to fix your insertion peak at 8 kilohertz, or at least a consistent one, But the thing is, the same person or whoever can be giving out graphs, and like the insertion peak is all over the place. There's no standard. So even in the same person's database, they're not comparable because they don't have the same insertion peak. So there's no way to compare. So like N fixed at 8K, right? And I mean, you try at least with your previous rig, but your new rig you can't, right? So you have to use another number, but you will fix a frequency. Like example, you were saying 9.5K.
Yeah, that's what it seems like the easiest to do is, yeah.
Yeah. So in your case, your new database will work with the you'll measure everything on your new rig with 9.5K, and it's comparable because that is consistent, right? But if person A has a sub base roll off, and then at least the sub base roll off is consistent there, so that's a plus point. But the minus point is it's not accurate there. But if the insertion peak is not consistent, then none of the measurements can be compared even on the same system. So like, let's say N's old mic, he has it at 8 kilohertz. I have it at 8 kilohertz. If we use similar conditions, it's not directly comparable, but our graphs do not differ by much. Like you can see the general shape there, but for people who even in the same rig without having a consistent insertion peak, then the measurements are all over the place. I think the very good example is when Crane measured C1R forcing different insertion peak. Even on the same rig, it changes. Hence, if one does not even consistently have a K or whatever number insertion peak, then all that person's A's measurements are pretty useless. Yeah, I would say.
Is that something hard to do to match the peak, or is it just you just have to measure things multiple times, adjusting for the peak?
Yes. Depend on how you measure. Yes, you may have to adjust multiple. So like sometimes I measure and I'm like, hey, the peak is shifted a bit, so I remeasure again. It's a matter of like having patience and being meticulous and spotting an error when you see one. But I guess most people do not look at it that way. They're not so careful about that, or maybe they do not know. Yeah, I guess.
Some people probably just don't know. But yeah, on this chart I have here, I have the one that Clinical measured is U1R, and you can see like if you insert it shallow, you have this gigantic looks like 6K spike, and then no upper treble at all. And then if you move it around, you can have a super dark IEM or a very very bright IEM, at least from looking at the graph. And I did the same thing recently with the AKG, the free earbuds that come with the Samsung phones, and just moving it by less than a millimeter, it totally changes the way the graph looks around after 6K. So that matters quite a bit. And then just there's some brochure information from Graz directly that shows changing insertion depth makes pretty wild changes in how the coupler responds to it. So I think people need to be wary of like, hey, everything maybe past 5-6K can be quite varying just based on less than a millimeter of change in how deep you insert a IEM.
Wow. Too much for my head to digest. But no, like I think that's like just a lot of trial and error. I think the other thing is like I don't like looking at graphs. Not because because I don't understand them to the first place. Well, and I don't pretend like I know how to read graphs. I feel like a lot of people we're getting over this boring part. I feel like a lot of people like trying to use graphs to justify their opinion, which is kind of like what I don't like about having graphs sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what your opinion on it is, or anybody.
There's two sides, right? You have the extreme on one side where, hey, this whatever IVM has a fantastic graph, and it's so cheap, it has to be the best thing in the world. And then the other side, you will have the, oh, this IEM is so good, it's top of the line, it's so expensive, but I don't care about measurements. It measures like crap. I don't believe it. So you have a very extreme end. And yeah, I would like to say both are not right because they don't understand what science and measurements are for in the first place.
How about this? Let's say graph is just to show the frequency response, and Critical have a really good disclaimer on his side that says that graph doesn't really show everything. It just shows he made that ice cream metaphor about comparing ice cream flavors.
Mm-hmm.
But like graph doesn't really show you resolution, decay, and what else? I don't know. Just that's the two off the top of my head. Ken?
At least not for FR SPL. You don't look at decay and stuff. You look at CSD, waterfall, etc. I mean, other we're just looking at FR. No, it doesn't tell you anything about soundstage, technicality, whatever. It doesn't tell you. But I said like it may give you a hint. Like back to our previous episode where we talk about treble extension. Of course, if you have no treble and no treble extension, well, if you're missing information where your music will have and your transducers cannot play, then obviously you're gonna have poor technicalities, right?
Right.
So that you can't move away from that. But as in like you can have treble and you can have treble extension to a certain extent, and you can still be lacking in technicalities because
Right.
yes, a simple FR graph does not tell you that this is better than that in terms of technicalities. It will only tell you this has more treble than the other guy. That's about it.
Right. I feel like, graph doesn't really show you most of technicality, and it doesn't really show you maybe just about half, like, because you don't really get a sense of like an attack and decay from FR graph, so it doesn't really show you that much about tonality either. So like, it's like it's a good it's a good way to find what you like, maybe. That's probably like if you like something and you can find something that graphs the similarly, and you might like it, but then like it's really not anything for certain, just in terms of like technicality and tonality wise. I feel like.
Yeah, I would like to say that graphs help in getting the general tonality. Like if a certain FR will you'll be expecting a certain level of tonality that is not too far off. It's like the flavor of ice cream, right? I mean, like if this is chocolate, well, when you taste it, it will be chocolate or chocolate-like, at the bare minimum. You can't be looking, hey, this should be chocolate ice cream on the label, and when you eat it, like, hey, no, it's not, it's strawberry. So FR helps in determining the general tonality, but not everything, because there's more than just FR as well. I mean, like the two same FR can sound very different with similar tonality.
I like how you brought it up, because I was gonna mention it. Yeah, I think what the big joke is that when Critical released his his Dawn, it graphs the same as as the AKG what is that, the N5005, right? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah, N50.
And people were joking about that, how AKG released the Rye hybrid with a Rye configuration with a DD, like I want to say like 3 years before Critical had a collaboration with Fearless. But the joke is that for anybody who haven't heard the N5005, is probably the most awful sounding IEM that you can ever. Like, it graphs really nice. It matches Critical's curve really well, and I'm sure Critical loves it. Except that the IEM sounded really, really wrong. It sounds very incoherent, and then it sounds like a broken IEM. I don't know. Anybody have anything just like say like things that graphs really nice, but like that doesn't really sound that great? I mean, Blonde 03.
Yes,
I think that's the other one.
Blonde 03, I think is the best example from the graph. Yeah, tonality is fantastic. When I heard it, I was like, ooh. The technicalities are like gutter level, But of course, it's a different price tier. But to me, it's a gutter level kind of technicalities.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's move on to something Coin likes to talk about. Not Harman curve. Peanut game. Coin. You like to talk about your peanut.
Of course. I live and die by the peanut game.
I think that's like the one big thing that I think on a graph that people don't really. Everybody have their favorite peanut game. I think. What's your favorite? Let's go from that. Start there. Coin.
As in, what do you mean, in numbers or what?
Yeah, just in numbers. Like, what's your preferred peanut game? What's a good peanut for you?
Probably around 8 to 9. Probably like more like 8. Yeah, 8.
ADB.
Yeah,
from
8 dB.
To peak at where? 2.5. Right?
I like to pick it around 3, but 8 dB assuming that the mid range, the 200 to 1K, is relatively like no like huge base shelf. If it does have a base shelf, then like starting let's say 600 to or 1K, then I'll need probably a bigger peanut gain, probably around 10 to 12.
So
I guess it's about the balance.
yeah, I think it is about
Yeah, but
balance.
if the 200 to 1K is flat, then yes, I'll prefer around 8 decibels worth of peanut gain.
And that's isn't that what Harman also have?
Harman is around 10, I believe.
Okay.
Hmm.
Really, that much? I mean, that little?
I think yeah, it's around 10. No, but Harman, you see, it recesses the area around 200 hertz. So in turn, you hear more peanut gain as well.
Okay. And for those, jeez, I don't want to explain peanut gain. For those who does not, Core, please explain peanut gain to people again. I know you done it like 3 times.
Okay. So everyone has their own like an outer ear. So when an IM bypasses this outer ear, you do need to make up for some factors such as you can see on the screen, for example, the torso, the eardrum, the ear canal, etc. So based off the Harman curve, they do suggest a peanut gain of about 10 decibels, where this technically should be what everyone on average should prefer.
Should prefer. It's again like a lot of personal preferences here. Like Harman is just like like a average. I want to say your average, what your average consumer would prefer in terms of peanut gain. And like with this game, like a lot of graph looks very V shape. I think but I feel like in reality like if you according to Harman, if you have 10 dBs of peanut gain peak at what 3K, it's really not. It's just really like a bass boost without it looking very V shaped. Um, I feel like that's what like a lot of people looking at graphs say. Oh, you see the peanut gain and you see a lot of IEMs do have that bass boost. You're just this is a V-shaped IEM. But in reality, it's just to compensate like whatever's
Yeah.
it bypasses your outer ear. That it's just there to compensate that.
Yeah, for example, if the IM has a rather what we call a straight line kind of response on the IEC 711 coupler, you would in reality hear a recessed upper mid range, and the case in point is the its feed lab R3, I believe it's called, where it graphs out like almost like a straight line, and it sounds very recessed in the upper mid range. So you definitely need to compensate for the uh for the bypassing of your external ear.
I put Korn's Toronto V5
man,
graph on the
thank
screen.
you. This is the best graph I've ever seen.
Well, which one is that? The red one?
The blue one's
of
the
course,
best
the red
one, by
one.
the way.
No, the red one's the best one.
Jeez.
The green line is the old 2017 version of the Harman IE target.
Okay.
The new version, I believe, has a little bit more bass, sub-bass response, and I believe a little bit more treble shoutiness, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
Lesser treble actually.
Oh, lesser.
From about 5 to about 8K, they flatten the hump.
Okay. Does it change between 1 and 3 at all?
I think it's still large. Oh no, in the Harman 2019, the recession at 200 hertz is lesser. It's about only 1.5 decibels, I believe, at 200 hertz. At 250 hertz, sorry.
I think you're just doing your graph preference wrong. I think that the right graph is from 20 to 1000 should be flat, and then with a 15 dB peak at 2.5K. I think Core knows which IEM I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The best IEM. But I think it's like to talk about peanut gain. That is like more of a preference stuff. I think like the whole FR thing, like the whole graph, is just to tell you what flavor of the ice cream, since we're going with the ice cream theme, and everybody have their own preference in it. But the other thing, but there's also like a lot of like you can make some generalization that IEM that doesn't graph very like that graphs really dark doesn't sound very resolving. like I think the one of the prime example was like the Empire Wraith that I don't want to say it's not resolving. It just sounds way too dark that it just doesn't feel correct, and it just feels low res to me. But there are like exceptions. So like VE8, I think it sounds like Korn hates VE8 by the way, right? Because
Yeah,
it doesn't have any
it's
Pina gain.
yeah, not much. It's
Um,
fine.
But you can't say it sounds low res, right? It just sounds soft. I feel like.
Yeah, a little.
Um, and is there any like other exceptions that you can think, like anybody think out of the top of your head that doesn't really sounds like what it grabs? Like, oh no, that's not the right word. Doesn't really like, you know, that's like exception to the rule. Like maybe sounds pretty resolving, but it doesn't really look that way on the graph, or things that are basier than it should sound.
I think the V8 is a prime example. Like the graph doesn't look like wow, but when you listen, it's like ooh.
I think if you look at the andrograph, it doesn't look as like it looks very neutral, right? If you look at the andrograph, I feel like, but it doesn't really. It sounds really warm, like it sounds warmer than a graph. So maybe that's just me not knowing how to look at graph, but I feel like it does sound like a lot warmer. And then you have that fucking peak on the like the old andro, not the new one. It has that peak.
It's bright to me though. The old Android is bright to me.
Is it really? Are you that sensitive to that 68K actual peak on that?
Yes,
on that?
yes, I am.
Okay.
I am.
Like to me, it just sounds pretty like, you know, it just sounds like really warm.
I guess it's because it's a pig. Like if you have, let's say you have a because like Con likes a lot of peanut gain, right? But for me it's like if it's a straight line for the entire lower mids, like, I can do maybe as low as 4 dB, but that's just pushing it. But typically I like 6 dB, and I like a little lower mids lift, maybe 1 to 2 dB. And if continuing the peanut gain, which I like it to pick earlier than 3K, Con likes it at 3K, I like it slightly earlier. So if it's 6 dB all the way and it goes all the way to let's say 10 kilohertz and it's like 6 dB, I'll be fine. But I guess for Android, it's like there's so little peanut and then it peaks so high after that. So the contrast is the problem. The contrast is what makes it ooh, like you don't hear much and then suddenly bam, it hits you hard.
Right. How does the peanut gain peaking earlier or later affects the sound of an IEM, if you can say?
For me, when I discuss with Con, I like earlier, maybe 2 to 2, well, plus just earlier than 3 will be nicer. It gives some we call it brilliance. Things will sound more brilliant if it's earlier. But the thing is, for some people, and especially for Con, they can sound nasally. So
I think if you're like, you know, I'm just to maybe guess, since your preference of peanut gain is so little, it can peak a little bit earlier, I feel like. But then if you peak at like what 2K and then like plus 10 dB, it sounds really aggressive, I think.
Oh yeah. If it's 10 dB at 2, no way. It will be nasal, funky, and whatever shouty, whatever you can start throwing everything at it, man. Yeah. So I guess for my preference for lesser peanut gain, I'm cool with slightly earlier. I'm okay with like 2K to 2 point. Yeah. Well, I mean I'm fine at 3 as well, but like I think Con, you prefer a more like triangle kind of pick, right?
I mean, you can just refer to the YouTube video. Well, it it looks like Harman, like essentially.
Yeah.
Like the newer Harman, not the old one on the picture.
I guess for me, I prefer even rounder kind of pick.
Or
Like
a more flattened and even out.
yes, correct. So like when I say 6 dB, so it's like the entire maybe 2 to 4K is around there. Maybe even with a dip at 3.
Did I draw your graph right? Ken.
I do think that's fine, but for IEMs that let's say they pick at 2 and then they just roll off after that like hard, and that'll make that makes the 2K very audible, like the 2K pick very audible.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's important to hold the same amount of sound pressure level, from like let's say 2 to 5K or so, or 4K.
Yes, absolutely important. If it picks early and it drops 4K, like minus 5 dB, you are in deep trouble. You will feel a lot of problems.
I'm getting I'm getting the EVR Mark II flashbacks.
Ooh. Well, I don't know how that measured, but well, when the embargo is over, I'll measure it. But yeah, that does sound like it, you know.
All right.
So,
okay, go ahead. Keep going.
yeah, so yeah, whenever peanut game there's low pick early and it falls off like a cliff, yeah, you're gonna have lots of problems. So, because the entire range like 2 to 4K, if it falls, you will just find everything muted. Like you just put a cloth over the instrument, put multiple layers of cloth canvas, you know, like over the microphone of the singer, or over the singer's mouth or something, you know.
Anthony, Corn, anybody have anything they want to talk about in terms of just graphing in general? Because you know, Anthony, what's frustrating to you when you graph stuff?
What's frustrating?
Yeah, I mean, like, what's is there like any difficulty when it comes to like, you know, just graphing in general?
Well, I think for me, the biggest like things I have to worry about is from actually just graphing is like what tips to use, because tips can change quite a bit on the treble response, and then making sure it's stable. And I have a lot of background noise in the area, and then there's like other stuff I have to worry about. But I think I basically tried using silicone tips, but a lot of times it doesn't. It ends up getting this gigantic peak in when I measure. So I switched just using these long foam tips that seem to not dampen too much treble, and it's very consistent. They're made by Newbie, which are it's a pretty cheap brand of foam tips, but they seem to give a very, I don't know, very neutral-ish response from what I can tell. That seems more accurate than using silicone tips or using like Comply foam tips, which dampen the heck out of stuff. And it keeps it stable within the coupler, so I don't have to like go jerry rig it with tape or silicone or whatever to make it stay stable.
And you have to get your 9.5K insertion peak, right? You have to keep adjusting.
Yes,
to you.
And it gives me a nice consistent peak with the same. And the other thing is like for whatever reason, when I use those tips, I get a really consistent resonance peak with the same type of insertion. So I insert it pretty flush with the coupler, and it gives me the same type of peak every time. So it seems very consistent from that standpoint, which I like.
Yeah, I feel like mostly it's like the graph thing is mostly just a consistency problem with it between your own measurements or measurements between you and or another rig. I think that's like probably the problem that most people have in having different measurements, and hopefully I hope in the future that we have probably a lower, like a higher tolerance when it comes to like mic manufacturing. Or you guys can all just afford like, you know, $20,000 rigs, which is
those have their own problems too.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, but you know, Ken Bob told me that $50,000 measurements are better than whatever Crin uses. So I'm gonna trust Ken Bob over that.
Yeah, so
somebody.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah.
Now
So,
we're just open.
so the thing is like you measure with tips, right? So for me, I take the tips out of the equation. which I guess I'm the only person doing this. I use BlueTech, so I just ignore the tips. So I just compare as like example. I think for the MEST, my measurement looks quite a fair bit different from yours. I use BlueTech and I force an 8K insertion pick. So what with the tips taken out of the equation, I just like, oh, so this is the bad thing. So with tips, it's gonna change according to the tips character, right?
Yeah. So do you take blue tack and just wrap it around the nozzle and then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I measure custom is the same thing, of course, and removing the top coupler and so on.
All right. Jeez. I always feel like this is gonna be a short one. Anybody have anything else to say about graphs and stuff? Because I like having these.
We haven't even covered the target curves, but
the Harman curve, guys, come on, the Harman curve.
Okay, Corn. You want to talk about everybody's favorite Harman curve? I don't know, like I freaking hate it, dude. I don't know why.
There's Harman curve, there's DF curve, there's eddy curve, there's free field curve.
Well, I think before the target curve, I think I would like to point out that I think a lot of people do not know how to read graphs.
Yes.
And in turn, accidentally, indirectly, or whatever, they create misinformation. When they do not know how to read graphs, and like, oh, they look the same, or like, oh no, these two are similar, but like, well, not quite similar, because there's a lot of things that can change, like when the peanut compensation is different, it can change a lot, because that's where our human ears are most sensitive at. Yeah.
Ken, I would like to remind you that this topic is this episode of podcast is called Graphs and Limitations, not human and their stupidity. So
that's the limitation portion, right?
I didn't mean that.
Yes, the limitation is you being stupid, of course. that is the biggest limitation of all.
It's true though. I mean, we didn't talk about like there's a big frustration. You asked me like what my frustrations were with like graphing. The real frustration I have is not necessarily like the user technique. I mean that's the point of it, but there's a lot of misinterpretation of graphs on out there on forums, on Discord, on whatever, where people take a look at they just look at graphs that they find on the internet and they're like, oh, look at this, it doesn't match this, and or this one is way too whatever, like too basey or too peaky or whatever. And what people need to understand is there's people using, there's people like us who are using the kind of the Taobao 7-Eleven coupler, which to an extent can match more closer to industry standards. So like you can look at like ratings and the headphones.com and even like Oratory's graph measurement database, and it's pretty close to that. But then there's people who are using and I used to use it too, the Dayton IMM6 mic, which is like a $20 calibrated mic, and then you buy a tube, like a PVC tube, and you cut it to varying distances, which will again matter quite a bit on how it graphs. And there's people posting measurements using that, and then there's people using the Veritas, or I forget how you say it, but it's a 3D printed coupler that a DIY CIM company created, which doesn't have any treble response at all. It basically just falls off a cliff, and people are posting that without any compensation. And then there's all sorts of home rigs like flat couplers and whatnot, and you can't just take one graph and compare it to another without knowing where it's coming from, because they're going to measure completely differently. And some of them, like in my opinion, the 3D printed coupler like is completely useless, because it doesn't look anything like, it doesn't even look like the Dayton mic or the mini DSP ears or the IEC one at all. Or at least the Dayton and the 7-Eleven coupler kind of match up to about 1K, So yeah, that's another thing people should understand.
Right, and I think that's the important part. Like, you should just only compare one person's, like, just if you're gonna compare Kern's graph, use his own comparison tool. Don't compare graphs with, like, from two different measures. Even if they use similar rigs, I think there's going to be bound to be a little bit of a difference, whether it be hardware tolerances or just like different style of measurements.
Yeah, for the simple fact that we don't even use the same source, we have different output impedance.
Right. But there's no but.
I think a lot of people also they don't tend to read a lot of people read graphs, they don't really tend to read the scaling. So some people have like scaling that's a range of like freaking 120 decibels.
Oh, yeah.
So the graphs are obviously going to look flat. So that's what Tri-Fi likes to do, where they put the scaling to about 100 to 120 decibels, and then people are like, oh my god, it's flat. I'm going to buy it now because it's neutral. But in reality, they don't read the scaling. They don't read how many decibels, like for example, the base is at. They don't read as well as the how do I put it? Like when you adjust your scaling to a low level, for example, around 50, the graphs are going to look pickier. Second thing, amount of smoothing will also affect how the graphs looks. Where if you apply very high octave smoothing, such as 1/3, the graph is going to look obviously very smooth compared to a graph that is say 1/12.
I don't even do smoothing for my graphs. 0.
Yeah, I think that Tri-Fi likes to use like a 120 decibel scale with 1/3 smoothing. So it's really crazy how there's a lot of ignorance going to this kind of interpretation of graphs, where people assume just from the general shape what it looks like on their computer screens, like whether it's going to sound neutral or not.
It's
I
misleading.
think yeah, I mean, first of all, yes, it is misleading and it's like shitty marketing from the Tri-Fi part, but I think not being able to read the scale is pretty much the same of not being able to pass like middle school algebra, because like they teach you how to graph. No, they teach you how to graph in algebra pretty early on. That's one of the first things you learn when you get to high school, and if you live in Asia, that's like the first thing you learn when you get to middle school. So I'm serious. Like, if you don't know how to read a scale on a graph, then it's kind of stupid, because you plug a point in a formula and you put that dot.
I've seen some typically it's Tri-Fi, but I've seen some marketing material where the scale is really large, like 120 or even 200 decibel, but it's so the picture is so small that you can't actually see it. And so the line looks like perfectly straight with like a one little dip, but that dip is actually like 20 dB or something.
Right, and then that's mostly on marketing. They just like to stretch out the graph and just to make it look more neutral than it is. But
Yeah.
But then again, people. Go ahead.
Oh, the other thing that I want to mention related to that is also the horizontal scaling makes a difference too. At least from if you're just looking at a visual. Horizontal scaling will make a difference too. So I've recently, since I use ultra wide screen now, I like looking at my graphs in like a 21:10 view, but a lot of the older graphs are more like 4:3 or 16:9 even. That does make like a V-shaped IEM graph look more like a kind of a U or balance shape graph. So there's some potential misleading that I'm probably guilty of. But for me, like looking at a wider angle gives me a little bit more detail between frequencies.
Well, Anthony, we don't all have that big money to buy an ultra wide screen, so graph does look pretty to scale on my monitor.
Yeah, I only view graphs on my iPad Pro, man. It's not. Yeah, I don't have a big screen for it.
But
More
but I
screen.
Yeah,
think like
iPads needs to move on to like the widescreen format like everyone else does.
Well, I'm using 60 dB scale, so I can. It's very clear if it's a V, or not a V.
Yeah.
all right. I don't know. I don't think it's an episode for any questions, or I don't know. I don't think anybody have any questions, but anybody have anything to say?
Con, so you want to talk about your curves now?
Oh yeah, target curves.
Oh
Well,
man.
See, Rush
yeah, I
Rush
guess
doesn't like
we
talking
could talk
about
about
this.
we could talk about Harman, I guess, if you guys want to.
No, I don't want to talk about Harman. It's boring.
All right, QDC makes the IM the best curves. Let's go. Bye bye.
Oh no, like, you can talk about Harman like if you want. Like honestly, what he did is it's a general study, a scientific study, right? So let's be clarify. We're gonna have this little Harman talk here. Um, everybody's got a curve now, which is kind of stupid. Which is funny because the three people here that I'm sitting with have their own curves, which and as I said, they're all stupid because that's their own preference.
Yeah,
And
I don't publish mine because it's only for me and myself. I don't think anyone would like.
shut up,
I
Ken.
just
You're
published
stupid.
yours. Look, it's on the screen right
Yes,
now.
yes, and,
See, it's
and
right
you're
there.
stupid too. And what Sean Olive did is that's actually a scientific research. It's very different from a preference curve. But then again, what the medium, what the average consumer preference might not be yours. Let me just get um, that pre, whatever out there. Go ahead, Corn. You talk about your favorite curve. Why Harman is awful.
Before that, like everyone curves is all based on different, what do you call that? Condition, right? Like so, the way I do mine is not even for universal. It's for custom, and it's not even comparable. That's why I don't talk about it much.
All right, give us your Harman spiel, Corn.
All right. Well, the Harman curve, it is a moving target. So, over the years, well, the Harman research team will, um, slowly, year to year, they will not year to year. Once in a while, they will update the curve to better reflect on consumer preferences, um, both trained and both trained and untrained listeners, where uh, they would try to get a general trend of um, how the market is reacting to different kind of sound, I guess, as well as kind of conclusions as to, for example, which regions in general like what type of sound more. For example, I think back in 2017, I think Germany preferred more mids compared to USA, where I think the NA region preferred the most the most V-shaped interpretation of the Harman curve.
Canadians.
Oh, it's Canadians. All right. Yeah.
There was there's a caveat in that the Canadians preferred more bass, but it was also they also had the youngest test audience.
Yeah, age does play a big difference with the Harman curve, where like I think the people age 55 and above they like the least treble, but people who I think were around 20 to 25, I believe, they liked a lot of bass and quite a lot of treble as well. So I guess it does really play a big difference in how the curve, like the end result of the curve, and the fact that the Harman curve, it is still an average of these findings where they take even outliers and tabulate it into this kind of results. So year to year right now we are seeing more and more bass as well as more and more treble. So it might change the next year. The next year where they do the research again. No one really knows. But one defining feature of the Harman curve that's quite rare in IEMs is the Harman IE curve is recessed at around 250 hertz, where they believe that it is more realistic given a zero noise test condition compared to uh, like as of now many IEMs they have some kind of boost at 250 hertz. So the claim is that a boost at 250 Hz will add a lot of unnatural body towards vocals, as well as making the bass sound more bloated. So when it comes to recession at the 200 to 250 Hz, I actually agree with the Harman curve where recessing this area makes uh, the mid bass sound snappier and emphasizes the sub bass response if it has a proper bass shelf. So it's something that I really like about the Harman curve.
All right, that's your Harman spiel. You're out of time, Corn.
Damn it.
I think we forgot one important thing about graph in relation to listening volume, because when one person say, oh, this is not V, you know, and this is V, it has a lot to do with the listening volume as well.
I'm just going to assume people are not boomers and does not listen to at 100 dB. And then you know what I'm talking about. Actually, two of them.
The Harman study,
I
I
think-
believe, was done at 82 dB, if I remember correctly.
82 or 84, I can't remember.
Yeah,
but
in that-
it's
in that
around
range.
that volume level.
And if you go by OSHA standard, that is still over 75. So yeah, there's that.
No, but the thing is that apparently I think from the World Wide Organization, they said that the average volume that people listen to their music at is around 90, which is quite worrying. So Harman is actually quite
Safe.
it's quite a safe and low quote unquote low listening level volume.
I don't think I listen to that loud. Then again, I don't really have anything to measure it with. I just
I'm always
But it-
surprised.
like-
I'm always surprised at how loud people listen to when I go to like meetups and stuff, and people hand me their headphone or their IEM like immediately after they listen to it, and then tell me, "Hey, try this out." And I'm like, I had to turn the volume down by half. So I wouldn't be surprised if people are listening in that 90 to 100 plus dB range sometimes.
Yeah,
boomers, I'm telling you.
But of course, like with different IEM, with different kind of what I mentioned just now was like what I'm trying to say, that with different frequency response, people will listen at different volume, because everyone set their baseline of like how loud it is to different part of the frequency. So if let's say you and I we set our volume based on the same frequency, but we listen at different volume at that same frequency, then it will be different volume.
Yeah, but that's because you're stupid, Ken. Because you volume match at the bass and I volume match in the vocals. So there's that.
Well,
and you can,
if I
you
hear the
can say
vocal,
who's right, which I am.
if the vocals are too loud, it's still a problem. So like I still do get, I mean, I still put vocals into consideration, but like, well, if there's what I'm trying to say, there's no bass, and then there's a tendency for me to bring up the volume, and I don't think this is totally not true for a lot of people, because you know they are commuting, they're in a train, you know, it's noisy. I think a lot of people do have a tendency to, hey, you know, it's very noisy out there. I need more volume, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a natural reaction.
There's also the
I
Fletcher-Munson curve too.
I think, if not wrong, Harman also did a kind of a research on like how good people's seals on IEMs are, and he found out that Sean found out that 50% of people didn't have a good seal with IEMs, so that might also be the one affecting and skewing the results.
Yeah. If you have a poor seal, then you lose bass. Then you're out there commuting with the trains and buses and whatnot, traffic getting loud. Yeah, you listen even louder.
Plus, in
Hence-
this is more in the Harman research, so zero noise, very quiet.
Yeah. So what I'm saying, that the preference of the people who are actually on the, you know, like listen during commute will be maybe very different from the Harman best conditions.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, poor seal is definitely user problem there. So
Yeah, we gotta get people to learn how to roll tips, otherwise they're ruining the Harman curve for us.
It is quite
And the
unnatural
Harman curve
for
is
like humans to be inserting things into their ears in the first place. So I totally understand why some people feel uncomfortable with IEMs where some people really feel that, oh, it's too intrusive. I can't have any IEM in my ears. They would much rather have headphones or speakers rather than IEMs, which I totally understand.
Well, I guess which is why a lot of people do very shallow fit. They get very big tips and they shallow fit. Well, and then in that case they get a lot more travel, right?
Yeah, it picks too early, so it really skews the results that you get from hearing.
Yeah, but surprisingly, a lot of true wireless seem to be slightly shallow fit from what I see from the nozzle and stuff when I try, I do measurements and stuff.
Yeah, I wish they fit deeper so that at least the fit is more secure, but a lot of them tends to have very shallow fit, so there's always a fear of me dropping them out while running or something.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is users using the wrong tip. So, well, then you get all sorts of problems. Which I think well, in this case, the AirPods Pro have this very interesting feature. When I tested it, they actually have a seal test. Like they will actually tell you that your tips are too big or too small because there's a mic there to detect how well it seals. So I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, one thing with graphs is that when it comes to the base measurements, they measure base in perfect conditions where, uh, let's say if a perfect seal, you would hear what the graph actually shows. But in reality, you probably don't use the IEMs in a zero noise environment as well as you don't achieve such a perfect seal. So in reality, you also hear lesser base than you would expect from the graph.
All right, join us next time on why idiots ruin scientific research because they don't know how to put IEM on correctly. But I think if anybody else wants to say anything, not about Harman, this will be the end of the show because it's bored me to death. I like, as I said, I like to have boring topic once in a while, but I don't know. Next week
But we still
or
have like 7 hours to go to compare with other measurement topics on YouTube.
And are there questions?
No questions this time. Just people whining about curves. But next episode will be our 20th episode. I don't know what we're gonna talk about yet, but it's going to be special, I guess, because I like round numbers and 20 is a nice number. So stay tuned for that. I guess that's my announcement.
This better be good then.
Yes, it's gonna be me yelling at my co-host, as always. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
All right.
Week. Maybe next week. All right, get the fuck out of here.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.